Hey, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Gorilla HR, the podcast. I'm Becky Droz, and today I'm super excited. I have Krystal Said. She is an experienced human resources practitioner, and I have invited her on because I want to talk a little bit just about her past experience and some things that are happening in the world of HR, and actually some really big things that are happening in the world of HR. So I'm super pumped. Krystal, thank you for joining me.
Oh, of course. I'm so delighted to be here and to be able to say hi to everyone. So, thank you so much for having me join.
Yes, yes, yes. So glad. Okay, so I have a question for you, and that is even how did you get into HR? And I ask you this because I don't know if you knew this or not, but I actually started my career in education and I taught for a couple years. And I think so many people fall into HR because when you're coming out of school, you don't even know it exists. But I feel like your path was a little bit different. So, how did you even get into this whole world of HR?
I a little bit fell into it as well. So, I originally had pursued my degree in education too, secondary education. And about halfway through getting my degree, I realized that that was not quite the path I wanted to do in real life.
I'm glad you figured that out before doing it for 4 years like I did, some
Oh, yes.
sucker.
Well, part of that too, I was a double major, so I was even a little bit behind on both sides. 2 years in, and was it was almost like I was 1 year in on both sides. But I definitely saved myself a little bit of headache. But I didn't know what to do, so I kind of panicked for a little while and had a year where I just took my general classes to stay in and all of that. But in the meantime, I've pretty much always been a full time employee, even in high school, and I've always just had to work. So during this time, I was actually working, and I was working in retail management. I was a store manager.
How did I not know this about you?
I don't know. I definitely thought I might have shared that before, but maybe not.
We've tucked away these little past secrets.
I know. So I managed a store, and it was in that journey that I realized that what I actually liked about being a store manager was more of the people stuff. So kind of the HR aspect of a manager's job. I did not like doing budgets. I did not like meeting sales quotas. I did not like inventory, but I loved working with the people. And it was kind of in that where I found, okay, I like this, but what does that mean? Like, what is that? And I come from a really small town where human resources was not something I even knew existed. It was not a job, even a possible job opportunity for me because I didn't know about it. And so I happened to have a friend that was majoring in human resources at the time, and I didn't even know what that meant for her. I didn't really know what it was, and I just happened to be talking to her one day, and realized that what I loved was human resources. So I made the switch at that time over to management, and the university I attended, it was management, a business degree in management focused in human resources. So I made the switch, and it was right around that time as well that that same friend was like, "Hey, by the way, we're looking for an HR assistant where I work." And I'm like, "Oh, really?"
Wow, the stars just aligned for you.
I know, it totally did. So I ended up getting an HR assistant job while I was still pursuing my degree, which was really cool. And I had a manager that was very flexible with me and allowed me to go to school for 3 hours in the day and come back and work late and work weekends and all this stuff. So I really got to dive full force, head in HR, both on the education and the work side. And so that's kind of how I fell into it and learned about it totally by mistake.
I feel like that's the same for so many people, and when I made the change coming out of education, I went to work for a small company where I was doing lots of different things and HR being a part of it. So we were one location, and so that for me is where I got the exposure, and same thing was like, "Oh, no, this is where I really see a career," and of course, HR is so huge as a field in itself. There's so many different disciplines within it. And I feel like for me, the education piece also really tied in because I love doing org development and I like helping people understand whether it's benefits or their pay, just a different way to look at things. So I found that for me, HR was a really good way to tie in that education background.
Yeah, I definitely think that's a great connection to make. And I find that so many people come actually from communications and education and get into HR because there are a lot of transferable skills. So yeah, I definitely, can see how that would have sprung up on you and you're like, hey, I like this.
So now that you're in it, so you had that nice experience of being able to get some work exposure and then also have the education piece. What do you do now to stay current? Because there's always things that are changing, and I'm going to dig a little deeper there in a minute. But how do you keep on top of everything that's happening in the world of HR?
Well, I can tell you, I really lean into my resources. You at Gorilla HR is one of those fantastic resources that helps me stay up to date on, new policies and things like that. There's also
I'm
other
going to pay you
organizations.
later. I didn't even tell her to say that, but thank you.
Thanks. I'll expect a small commission. Thanks. There's a lot of organizations too, and just signing up for newsletters, even coming directly from the government. I think a lot of people tend to get so busy focusing on their job that they forget to look up from their desk and look around, and just see what's out there. Yeah. So you have to just keep your eyes open. And even something small as a crazy Facebook article may prompt you to say, what are they talking about? And then you go and do legitimate government, sponsored research to say, oh, here's something that's going on. Let me, learn more about it. Not through Facebook, right? Through legitimate sources. But even something like that can prompt you to want to look into something further.
It's the trigger to do the real research.
Yes, yes.
Are you saying that everything on social media is not totally true?
I know it's a shocker, right? I mean, that, TikTok and well, I don't even know if that's here anymore. I can't keep up with that. But, all these social media outlets, definitely have a lot of incorrect things, but they do have some things that can make you think a little bit. So,
I think that's the sign of a good HR person, right? Something that prompts you to say, "Wait a minute, is this right? Do I need to dig deeper? What's really happening here?" And then you have to go on the treasure hunt to figure it out.
absolutely.
So, when I was planning this podcast with you, as well as thinking about other HR practitioners and other business leaders that I want to talk to, one of the questions that I have for them is what are some laws around running your business or managing your people that you wish did not exist? And when I posed that question in my mind, it was before we ended up in a situation where some of our laws are just wiped away and things are being done at an executive level without the other branches weighing in. And so I find it really interesting, but I want to talk about this topic of laws that should not exist. And I know for some people that would be affirmative action. And we are currently in a spot where affirmative action is basically wiped away from the employment landscape. And I want to use this opportunity because I know that you are a wealth of knowledge in this area just to clear up some misconceptions about what affirmative action was even all about in the employment space. So, first question, I think a lot of people think affirmative action is quotas and like you must hire, 15% black people and 15% Hispanic or Latino, Latinx people. So I'm going to stop there and say, is that true? Is that really what affirmative action is?
Oh man, the number of times I have had to say this is not a quota. I definitely a penny per statement. I would be rich now. No longer have student loan debt. Um, but yeah, it is absolutely not true. Like there are no quotas associated with the affirmative action expectation. Unfortunately, that is what has come out of it. That is a misconception that a lot of people think is the purpose behind the affirmative action and the plans that have to be produced. But quotas are unlawful. We still have the equal employment opportunity and that whole concept there. And if you are choosing to hire someone on the basis of their skin color, even for what you're thinking is a quota, that's illegal. Can't do that. So unfortunately, it is something I've heard quite a lot, but it is absolutely not the intent behind affirmative action plans.
I'm so glad you said that because I've heard that so many times and it's so frustrating, when I hear people that are like, "Oh yeah, I'm so glad we got rid of that and we didn't need that anyway." And it's like, "Well, you didn't understand how it really works and you have like all these misconceptions about it." So I personally will be curious to see, I'll be curious to see about all kinds of things in the employment landscape, but especially here in this context where I'm a very data driven person. And I think a lot of the things around affirmative action are also data driven. And so it'll be interesting to see what happens and how have we made progress in advancing work for women and different race and ethnic categories and where are we going to backslide. I know for me the comp space is huge and we've backslid when it comes to closing the wage gap. So I don't know. My mind is blown by the whole thing, and I'm just sitting here watching.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of people, don't even fully understand affirmative action and what it is. And I think that's some of the problem. Really, affirmative action, it was started back in 1965. And, I want everyone to think about what was happening back then, right? And there was a need for this and an expectation, this whole order that's been like revoked and everything. So, if you look at what the plan itself actually does, when you're talking about being data driven, what we're looking at is your workforce in your organization. And we're looking at it sliced and diced by race and gender and, other things. But I'm just going to focus on these two because that's more specific to the recent stuff. Sliced and diced there, and we're comparing it against certain census data in the job groups that these individuals work in, as well as the geographical location where these individuals are employed. And all we're doing is we're using this data to say if the census data shows that in this job group, there are 34% available males and, gosh, I'm not good at math, but the other percentage of females, that if this is what is available in the geographic area that your job is, that it would expect within a certain standard deviation that your workforce would mirror the available pool of applicants, right? And individuals out there. And so the plan itself just gives you an understanding, first of all, of where you're at. What does it look like? Now, if you're, slightly over, under those types of things, those aren't things that you need to rush out and, quote unquote, like go for a quota, right? Because that's what people think it is. It's more about just bringing awareness to, okay, maybe we can do a little bit more because there looks like there's a lot more people in this group that is of this race or this group in this category that are available to work. So why aren't they here with us, right? So it just gives you a framework to look at. Then from there, you're taking the affirmative action or proactive steps towards increasing your applicant pool, making more awareness to individuals about your jobs available, those types of things. So we're not going out and saying, oh, you're missing one person of this particular race, you have to go out and hire them. That's not what it's saying. It's giving you just a general analysis of your workforce, and then it's asking you to make sure that you do affirmative action, you do proactive steps to increase the diversity of the candidates that are in your applicant pool so that you can still make the qualified selection based on skill, based on education.
Wait, I gotta stop you right there. So you're telling me that with affirmative action, it's not like you have to hire this person if they're not qualified?
That is correct. It is still qualified hires that you are looking for. And that is the whole premise of equal opportunity employment is you are hiring based off skill. You're not hiring based off their race or based off their gender. And this is the whole misconception with affirmative action. And again, we're thinking back to when this was originally created, the need that was present at the time and in the society. And unfortunately, it's just gotten diluted, confused over time, and there's this misconception. And I hate that that is what is kind of dominating the whole idea of affirmative action. I don't know what's going to happen with it. I know there's a lot of things going on out there. It's been revoked. Other people saying, no, he can't do this, there's that. There's so much going on. Don't want to jump into politics by any means. But I think that there is a need for something in this space. And I'm just not sure where we're going to land.
I mean, it's really just saying, as an employer, you need to make your best good faith effort to have your workforce look like the available pool of people to do that work.
And that's what that data just lets you know where you stand, and you make that good faith effort. But at the end of the day, you choose your hire based off their qualifications and that alone.
So let's say that you are put in charge and you could wipe out a law that relates to employment practices in some way. What would you want to get rid of?
Oh, man. So I've really thought a lot about this over the years. I mostly find that I disagree with a portion of a law or regulation, or I feel that it would be better if it was tweaked. I can tell you that, with pretty much all the laws I can think of, I can think and understand how they were intended to work, and the principle is good. But I also know that sometimes those don't work exactly how they were intended. So it's hard to answer this question directly. However, I can tell you one thing that recently has just really had me like, ugh, is exempt, non exempt status. And what I'm about to say is probably 100% not popular opinion. And I know this is totally your space, Becky, as well, and what you do with compensation.
Well, I can't wait to hear it because I was thinking like FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, was written in 1938, and so some things have not kept up. So I'm really curious where you're going.
And it's funny you say not kept up. That's exactly kind of what I was getting at too with the whole affirmative action too. Is like none of these laws keep up with the time, and I think that's where my biggest quarrel with a lot of them, even the small pieces here and there. The laws are great, but we have to amend them to keep up with the times.
Yeah, or the guidance needs to match the reality.
Yes, yes. So back to this. So this is probably just not at all popular opinion, but it is my opinion. So I'm going to still share it and share the why behind it. So I am not a big fan of non exempt roles for certain jobs. And I'm thinking specifically jobs that are office or corporate based. And I understand the principle behind it. And I want to be clear that that is stated. I understand that it's set up to protect people from having, employers work them too much or not pay them, try to save money by having three people work really long hours because they can pay them the same versus having six people do it. I understand the protection behind the law. But what I do see that it challenges is flexibility. And in today's age, I am seeing the request and the need for flexibility far more than I have seen even pre-COVID. Because of the FLSA regulations, you have to, if you're not exempt, you have to document your time worked. You have to ensure your, workforce documents their time accordingly. So from the employee perspective, you have to make sure you're clocking in and out exactly when you're working.
Quick clarification, so in case anybody who's listening doesn't know. So exempt, non-exempt. So exempt people are typically who we think of as being paid on a salaried basis. Not always, there's a lot of little nuances, but generally when we think exempt, that's somebody who's salaried, and non-exempt, we often think of those people as hourly. And so then that's where all these things that Krystal is talking about come into play, where you have to document, every minute that you work, you're clocking in, clocking out, all that good stuff. Okay, go on.
Thank you for that. And so, there's a lot of, kind of stipulations and expectation to make sure time is accurately recorded. Because if you work, you should be paid for that, and I absolutely agree with that. The challenge that I find in this particular day and age is that there's a lot of issues and family needs that are happening. Expenses and costs are at an all-time high, and let's say for example you have a family or a child care challenge and you're not exempt, you're working by the hour and you need to step away for 1 to 2 hours to deal with your child care challenge, right? So of course you have to clock out because we don't want you to have time theft on your hands, right? A lot of policies are built based on that. Maybe you can't make up those hours that day, so the next day you plan to work longer hours, but now your company policy frowns on people working hours kind of outside of that standard 8 to 5 or whatever your typical work day is. Now 2 days later, you have a sick child and they have to stay home with you while you work. Now you also can't be fully attentive, so you're kind of like, oh man, do I need to clock out for 15 minutes while I go do this? Do I need to clock? And it's just, it really restricts the flexibility that I see so many people need. And company policies are very rigid because the way the law is written to protect, of course, the company and the employee, but it's very rigid and it creates, I think, a very challenging landscape for those that are in that category of kind of corporate based or working from home roles that are having to manage the time and also manage life. Whereas the exempt, employee, they can step away in most cases for 1 to 2 hours, without clocking in and out. It's not going to raise a red flag. They're not trying to make up an hour. They're not worried about violating there's a lot of stuff there.
I know my wheels are spinning now.
Right.
So because now I'm thinking about it from 2 different perspectives. So, if you have somebody who is hourly, I mean, potentially, if it's coming down to a rigid employment policy, there's nothing that says you can't pay them. So you could say, "Hey, I know that you had to leave, and I'm allowing that, and so I'm going to have. I'm a great employer who understands that my employees have families and have needs outside of work, and so my culture is one that I'm going to allow so many hours of just paid untimed work outside of vacation or things like that." So you could adjust your policy to allow for pay, but the other thing that now you're making me think about though is for those hourly folks, and again with the way that we work, particularly those that support an office environment, is that amount of de minimis work where somebody's answering a phone call or checking an email. Let's say you have somebody who's an admin or a reception, office support, office management, and you want to call and make sure that the printer repair guy showed up or the coffee machine repair, so you want to call them or text them and it's outside of their work hours. How many times can you do that before it's no longer de minimis where you don't have to account for it? So, yes. So, I totally agree. I think we have lots of issues around our exempt and non-exempt and how to really apply it in a way that makes sense with today's technology.
Right, exactly. And that's exactly where I was getting at is the protection. I understand. I understand the concept, but somewhere we've got to make some tweaks, just to allow for a more flexible environment for our employees.
Yeah, because it's not in situations where you're trying to screw over employees or screw them out of pay, but it's what really makes sense for a win-win situation.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so flip side of that question, is there a law that you would put in place, if you could?
Yes, and I just recently experienced a personal situation that's just made me very passionate about this particular topic in law. So, hands down, I would put a law into place regarding paid parental leave, federal
Yes.
paid
Yes.
parental leave. I can tell you that while FMLA is a good thing,
It is not enough.
it's not enough. It should not be relied on for those having a child, and I think there should be extra protections and support for the birthing parent as well, because I can tell you that coming from a birthing parent's perspective, there's a lot that goes on birthing a child. First you go through pregnancy, and we all know that's hard enough, right?
Oh, I've heard it's real easy. You were real cute when you were pregnant. You made it look so easy.
Right, right. Yeah, super easy.
From what I understand, your birthing process and recovery was all just, like, light and breezy as well, puppy dogs and rainbows.
I know, I know. Well, actually, I had not a bad pregnancy at all personally, but I had a terrible birth experience. And I'm like, man, like, I kind of wish I would have had the reverse, like a challenging pregnancy to have an easy birth. But, but I mean, as some people have a full 9 months challenging pregnancy. Some people are very sick. There are a lot of doctor's appointments. If you happen to be high risk or have complications, there's even more doctor's appointments. And you just have to try to not have to use your FMLA time during that time because you only get 12 weeks, right? And that's, of course, if you are eligible. And of course, if your employer is eligible,
Yeah, and it's unpaid.
and it's unpaid. And, just going through the birthing process, and the reason why I really want to advocate for additional support for the birthing parent is when you go through birth, there is medical trauma inside, outside, and emotionally, because your hormones, scientifically proven, hormones are all over the place. And, it's, you go through all of this, you're trying to take care of a baby, you're not sleeping, there's a lot of things going into that. But then after 12 weeks, and again, that's if you are one of the lucky few to be able to take advantage of that. You're expected to come back to work and perform at the level of everybody else that has not just gone through a major trauma and have a lot of hormone dysregulation. And just speaking of the 12 weeks, so it's unpaid, like you said, and not everybody has the opportunity to save up money for that 12 weeks. Not everyone has the opportunity to take advantage of short term disability, and some companies may not even offer it. And a lot of companies cap PTO. So it's not like you can even plan 2, 3 years in advance and save up enough PTO because PTO policies cap you. So trying to get through a full 12 weeks unpaid while managing multiple medical expenses on top of your normal expenses is just absolutely, difficult. And in current economic times, it's even more of a challenge. And I'm seeing so many people have to return to work way sooner than the 12 weeks. And medically, you're not even released until 6 or 8 weeks. And I'm seeing people needing to go back to work after 3 weeks. And, other countries out there are just absolutely dominating us in paid parental leave, paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave, maternity leave, and parental leave. And my sister in law lives in the United Arab Emirates. And over there, they even pay for up to 60 days of paid parental leave. And then you can take an additional 15 days after that at half pay. So, we have a lot of other countries out there that just support parents and support birthing parents. And unfortunately, we're falling way behind in that area. So,
Way behind.
that would be a law that I would absolutely put into effect today.
Totally agree. Yes, you have my support for paid parental leave. I think for both parents of any gender, ought to be able to have the time for the physical parts of it, but also the bonding aspects. So I think we are so behind here. I'm actually getting ready to take a trip in a couple weeks to Norway, and when I was doing some research just in general about the country and the customs and different things, you can take basically a year at 80% of your pay, or take a few weeks less than that and have 100% of your pay. So there's the split, but like a year, not 12 weeks of unpaid, like we're talking about, 12 months of paid parental. I think that is just, and I don't know if I have every detail of that right. So if you're an expert in Norway, I may be butchering parts of that. But either which way you slice it and dice it, it is way, way, way more caring for the families.
And a lot of other European countries as well. And scientifically, when you do birth a child, hormones don't return to normal levels until at least about a year, and that really aligns with some of these other country policies that do provide that full 12 months. And, US, we have to step it up. And I'm so proud and happy to see companies and states stepping up and doing extra in these areas, but it's not enough. We need to come together as a country as a whole and put something in place.
Well, and I think a lot of it also comes down to what we accept as norms of caregiving. I think that that is something that sets us back in a lot of ways, is just how we view caregiving, whether it's for children or aging adults and families. And I would love to see a shift in our attitudes around how we do that and how we can support people as a parent. But even as you started with just the lack of FMLA and what that, or I guess the intent is good, but what it really does. I know when my dad, he was really sick a couple of years ago, and I was taking a lot of time, and it's actually around the time I was starting my business. And even though I've never at least I don't think I've never worked for a place that would really be like, Becky, you weren't at your desk at 8 o'clock this morning. I've never been anywhere where people were that rigid. And fortunately, like I have that privilege. So I recognize that. But when I was out with my dad, it really solidified for me that there are people where this would force them to lose their job, because the time that I was taking, even if I had it, and it would have qualified as an FMLA type of leave, but the amount of time that I spent, I would have blown through that and I would have lost my job. So I agree. It doesn't do enough.
You've taken time now for your dad, or in my case, I had taken time for a birth, and then let's just say an unfortunate medical event happens to you shortly after that. What do you do? Because you now have no FMLA left. So you're now faced with a challenging medical situation or losing your job, and
This all supports my message of your employer is not your fucking family. Like,
right.
like I tell people that and I'm like, they're not. It's a professional relationship, a business relationship. Like the things that you're going to do for your family are very different than what your employer is going to do for you, even in a super generous, family friendly environment. Okay, so I'm going to ask one last question. So we're still early into 2025. So what do you think employers really need to be focused on this year?
Oh, I feel like it'd be easier at this point to say what not to focus on because just in the first month of 2025, there's been so many changes happening. My head is spinning, trying to keep up with everything. But I can tell you that first and foremost, businesses just need to stay up to date on changing laws. I love that we started our whole chat today with that. we have to stay up to date on changing laws and regulations. Even if that means every single day you check in with, your sources, you check in with those reliable sources like Becky at Gorilla HR, a perfect example. Check in to make sure you're up to date on that ever changing landscape. And then, secondly, and I think this has been the underlying theme of our entire conversation today, is businesses need to focus on their employees. It is a really tough time out there right now. Inflation, interest rates, extreme waiting lists for so many government supported programs like housing assistance, for example. Your employees are having a hard time.
Yes, people are struggling.
Focus on them, focus on that flexibility, focus on, are they properly compensated? And, if you're saying you're compensating competitively, does the data
Oh,
prove
girl,
that?
don't even get me started. Don't
I knew
even
that'd be
go
a good
there.
topic for you, but focus on your associates and your employees, and that is my recommendations on this year. Focus on them because we're all having a hard time out here. We could use some support from our employers. So yes,
Agreed. I know, I think of it just like you said, it's like I feel like you can't be in cruise control right now. Like, you need your both hands on the wheel, paying attention to everything because things are constantly changing, and we need to be looking out for our people, not running them over.
right, yep,
Well, Crystal, I have loved our conversation today, and I am still my mind is still reeling on some of the different FLSA and, like, what would I do to change that and make that work? So, I love the thoughts and the things that you shared, and it was such a pleasure chatting with you today. Thank you so much.
yeah. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts at some point on some ideas as well about your non-exempt challenge. So there you
We'll have to do a follow-up.
go. Yes, I love it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in and listening to us today. Join us again on Gorilla HR, the podcast.
That's it for this episode of the Gorilla HR podcast. We hope you found some unconventional wisdom and actionable advice to help you in your own HR journey. Remember, we're all working together to build better workplaces. Want to join in the conversation? Send us your questions, stories, and maybe even your own guerrilla tactics to podcast@gorilla-hr.com. And if you enjoyed the show, please like, subscribe, and share with your network. Until next time.